welcome everyone. This is the We Covenant to Affirm and Promote webinar. This is November 6, 2013, and my name is Chris Buja, Growth and Vitality Consultant for the Metro New York District. Thank you, Mark, for helping host this meeting, and thank you all for taking the time to be here to learn about conflict and covenant and how it applies in our leadership roles. I know there's a lot of folks here coming from different places in congregational life, be it the ordained ministry of some sort, various religious professionals, as well as all types of lay leaders. So I'm very grateful that you are so committed to your Unitarian Universalist congregations and to the Unitarian Universalist faith as a whole. So as Mark mentioned, this webinar was brought together through the UU Association of Membership Professionals, the Central East Regional Group, which includes the Metro New York District. Thank you, Mark, for your help. In my role as the District Growth and Vitality Consultant, I get many opportunities to work with Mark and be in touch with Mark on growth-related happenings, trends, and techniques. So it's been great working with him, helping to bring this to life. And I'm just very grateful for many other Unitarian Universalist leaders, ministers, colleagues, and lay leaders that I've gotten to know over the years and have gained so much knowledge and information that I'm just very happy to share with even more Unitarian Universalists that it might be beneficial in your congregational lives. So I want to begin with some opening words. What would it take for us to see the holy or the divine in each person with whom we tussle in congregational life? So if you have chalices in your respective location, or let us light the chalices of our hearts and minds, that we remember that we are always living our principles as Unitarian Universalists, that we are challenging ourselves to see the divine in ourselves, in our peers, and in the people we don't yet know. So, and I want to keep coming back to that concept of covenant and being in right relationship with each other, especially when we find ourselves in the midst of conflict. So here's what I'd like us to explore this evening. So who needs to know how to deal with conflict? We'll say a little bit about what the definition of conflict is, as well as some different specific levels of conflict to be aware of, and also consider what techniques, what processes we might employ in congregational life to help prevent or minimize conflict from arising, and as it will inevitably happen, how to engage it and manage it and bring it to resolution in a healthy manner. I've included a few items at the end for some additional information, though I plan to have a more thorough follow-up list of specific books, websites, and articles to continue the learning. As Mark mentioned, depending on how much time is left, there may be more opportunity for some conversation, questions. I'll periodically stop to process the chat box observations. But we are aiming to keep it to no more than an hour and a half as the webinar was billed. So it'll be between an hour to an hour and a half. Thank you. A number of folks did submit some examples ahead of time around congregational conflict that they've experienced, witnessed others going through. So while I, as I mentioned, did not want to give any specifics to those situations, it was helpful in just trying to frame some of the general principles of how congregational leaders might find themselves in the midst of conflict. So I want to share some of the major concepts that can be helpful to leaders in managing themselves, and then how they can healthily engage with other people. So certainly, I know many congregations will at some point find themselves in conflict, and it may take a more thorough conversation. It could be, I'm happy to have that conversation in a separate space. Mark Bernstein and many other regional and district consultants are available for a more individualized processing. So I encourage you to take advantage of those district, regional, and association resources. So who needs to be familiar with conflict and conflict resolution and how to be a self-differentiated leader? I would say it's everybody. Lay leaders of all sorts, board members, all kinds of committee members, ministers in various roles, be it settled, interim, community ministry, and certainly any members, not to say that any member is just a member, but the more people involved in all aspects of congregational life who have familiarity with these concepts and are aware of what their anxiety triggers are and what are the healthier versus unhealthier ways to resolve that anxiety is beneficial to the congregation as a whole and to the overall growth and vitality of a congregation. And also to give special note for the support of the UU Association of Membership Professionals, whether those who are in the role of membership-related activities, paid professionals, or lay leaders, I certainly want to emphasize that those early opportunities as people enter into congregational life, as visitors, as newcomers, going through beginner classes, I think there are a lot of great opportunities there to help acclimate the prospective new member to a congregation covenant of right relationship, so that that early work, the sort of pre-work and prevention type measures, I think can help minimize conflict from escalating so far down the road. So definitely to make note of how important it is to make the covenant of right relationship a clear part of what it means to become a member. So, whether it's, again, as a leader in a congregation, whatever that role may be, you may at some point have found yourself perhaps as the person on the left or the right, or many times the one stuck in the middle between member to member, staff to staff, staff to member. It's an unfortunate situation that we can find ourselves in as leaders, and what is it that we shall do when we're in that spot? And again, some of those examples people shared where it seems other members of the congregation, were having problems, were finding themselves in conflict, and looking to that lay leader, that staff person as someone who can solve that problem. So just what are we to do when we find ourselves in that conundrum? So to talk a little bit about what conflict is, and I want to read this definition that was crafted by the Alban Institute, a organization that does a lot of consulting and research around church systems theory. Congregational conflict occurs whenever two or more parties organize to achieve certain goals. Conflict may be the result of scarce resources, ambiguity in any form, overregulation, competition, lack or absence of procedures, exceptions, or differences of interpretation. So again, congregational conflict occurs whenever two or more parties organize to achieve certain goals. Conflict may be the result of scarce resources, ambiguity in any form, overregulation, competition, lack or absence of procedures, exceptions, or differences of interpretation. Conflict is inevitable and inherently neutral. Only the quality of the response may be judged effective or ineffective. And a few other examples of where conflict may arise. If the mission is unclear, if there are no existing procedures for a new situation, if different people or groups are treated differently without explanation or obvious cause, or if it is just simply difficult to figure out how to do something. So in just a moment, I'm going to list out some of the anxiety triggers that might set us off as leaders or as members, and I'll invite you to add to that list as well. Now, in addition to conflict in general, there are some distinctions made around levels of conflict, and a couple leaders have articulated similar divisions of conflict. Dr. Helen Bishop and Reverend Speed Lees are two examples. So I'll just start with the simpler delineation. The first level of conflict is there's a problem. At this level, emotions are not involved. We consider the issues rationally, and no facilitator is needed at that point. The next level of conflict is a disagreement, where in addition to the problem level, issues are associated with personalities, and people may stop sharing information. From there, it may progress to a contest, where factions form and mudslinging begins. As faction-like groupthink takes hold, information is distorted, and questioning a faction's party line can mean ostracism. From there, it may elevate to a crusade, where these factions not only want to win, they want the other side to leave. Each side sees itself as principled, and the other side is immoral. Some members may quit. Congregations may seek to fire their ministers. The fifth level, which could be termed the War of the Worlds or intractable, members not only want the minister fired, they want to make sure he or she never works as a minister again. They not only want the other side to stop, they want them to leave. Congregations may split over level 5 conflict, and attorneys may be needed. And at that point, it may be too late for any outside facilitators to have a healing effect. So to get into anxiety, as understanding that when a person, a member in a congregation, when their anxiety level rises, that the potential for conflict will arise with it. And to recognize that anxiety is part of being human. It's part of what keeps us alive. And it will challenge us to make changes in our lives. Although, to be aware that when that level of anxiety becomes too high, it can become paralyzing. It can start to lead us to our less than best selves in our behavior. So to recognize what it is that can trigger our anxiety. There are a number of common triggers noted. One list as presented has as many as 14. So at the top of the list, money, and I would certainly note that money is not just simply having too little of it. Even having a lot of it can be anxiety-producing. Type of worship, consider, for example, what is included in the worship service, what is not included, the potential of going to multiple worship services. Will one of them be, quote, more traditional? Will one be more contemporary? Those who have a preference and a comfort with one or the other may feel their anxiety rise at this idea of something new and different and outside the norm. Certainly anything involving sex or sexuality. What comes to mind if there's any sort of sexual abuse, inappropriate relationships within the congregation, whether it's staff to staff, staff to member, member to member. I mean, just the reality as Unitarian Universalists are committed to the healthy understandings of sexuality through the Our Whole Lives program. It's definitely still a sensitive issue, and when abuse or assault or harassment occurs, it can be very damaging. The pastor minister's leadership style, and I get into this a little bit later. It could be something along the lines of being a more hands-on leader or hands-off, quote, more micromanaging or big picture. This can be not just for the minister, but any leadership position. If someone thinks a leader is doing too much or too little, and not the way they would do it. Old versus new, growth and survival. Just throughout the Unitarian Universalist denomination, there are ongoing conversations about how to grow. How are we not growing over so many years? Will Unitarian Universalism survive? And individually, each congregation, many are wrestling with this challenge, feeling just barely able to maintain membership and attendance, and feeling the anxiety of who will carry on this congregation when its longer-term members have moved on, moved away, died. Certainly staff conflicts are anxiety-producing. The congregation's focus, again, within the congregation, is there a perception, differences of preference as to the congregation is too focused inward, we're too much focused on our internal community, we're not doing enough in our wider community. So the tension around that, the tension around the resources to have a more external focus, which gets back to money as well as volunteer time. Major traumas, tensions or transitions, that type of issue, that trigger, can be also related to things outside the congregation itself. Just, again, here I am in New Jersey, and this area that was affected by Hurricane Sandy, so you can think about those kind of major acts of nature, current events that can be impacting the members of the congregation, raising the anxiety indirectly, but having an effect on the congregation's well-being and how people will react and respond to each other. Oh, and I had a few more to add, excuse me. Harm done to a child, death of a child, property. I can speak for myself as the congregation Somerset Hills was very excited to finally acquire a building. We've been there, this is our 4th year there. So it brought a lot of excitement as well as a lot of anxiety, being building owners now, and feverishly working as quick as we can as far as building projects go to make it a fully accessible space. And just to say a little bit about boundary issues, and later in the presentation I addressed some of the issues around the leadership roles in the congregation, again, be it the volunteer or paid roles, and the clarity of kind of whose job is what, and how are they expected to do that job. And where there is a lack of clarity, where there is ambiguity, there is a higher probability that people may feel that their toes are getting stepped on, that someone's trying to do my job, no one's doing this job, I thought it was this other person's job. So the lack of clarity, the lack of connection and understanding of how the different roles and leaders sort of connect and integrate and complement one another in a shared ministry style, that can be a challenge. So with just this, very basic and beginning understandings of conflict, anxiety, and now to introduce the concept of healthy systems, systems thinking. You can indicate in the chat box or put up your red flag if you're at all familiar with the Healthy Congregation series. which was produced by Peter Stanke. I believe it was in association with the Lutherans, and throughout his consulting experience, putting together this workshop series to help congregations, help congregational leaders be able to engage conflict in a better way, and hopefully minimize the rate at which conflict escalates to that 4th or 5th level. Fortunately, not only did the Lutherans create this series, but some wonderful Unitarian Universalist leaders learned it and did a lot of adaptation and sort of expansion for Unitarian Universalist purposes. I believe Reverend Dr. Richard Speck, Connie Goodbread were among some of the initial trained facilitators, so they've brought a lot of Unitarian Universalist experience and concepts to what was the Healthy Congregation series. So if you've had some experience with it, a lot of the material I've plucked, cherry-picked from there, as it's so helpful. But a major piece of it is understanding the congregation as a system, and to emphasize the leaders within the system have a great deal of influence and are models and setting an example of ideally healthier behavior, healthier conflict management, and it's tough to say that a leader could be a fully non-anxious presence, but to be a less anxious presence is a good start and probably more realistic. So in the unhealthy system, or again, individual by individual, that the negative responses, the unhealthier responses could be to distance, to fuse, or to triangle. And just to briefly touch on those, distancing in the sense of a total withdrawal from a situation, from engagement with other people, other members, which may be helpful in the short term just for that person to be out of that situation, but to not be in relationship anymore, it then stops the process of coming to some resolution and reconciliation and problem solving. The opposite side of that is fusing, of just total enmeshing in another person, and that could be in the sense of just very hostile sort of conflict, fighting and arguing, or just going back to the boundary issues, to have no sense of boundaries, or to expect that someone else is going to solve all my problems for me, that I'm feeling anxious and another person needs to feel my anxiety too, and that will alleviate it. And that leads into the concept of triangles, and I will say a bit more about the concept of triangulation in a few more slides, because it seems to be such a natural tendency for people to do. So, again, within that Healthy Congregation series, there is an immense amount of scientific and physiological analysis around the parts of the brain, and it was just overwhelming just to review it ahead of this. So I'm opting to keep it as simple as I can and just look at the brain as breaking down into these different parts of thinking, feeling, reactive, and in a humorous fashion here, church meetings. So again, I don't know if anyone here has been in that church meeting, but again, maybe you can imagine where it seems people aren't using their higher functioning abilities, higher thinking, higher feeling, and becoming more instinctive, more reactive, more survival, in more of a survival mode. So the challenge is to not let ourselves slip into that knee-jerk reaction space. So some of those reactions that we might have to anxiety could be to fight. Gracie Smith is not pleased one little bit with changes at her church. The organ replaced by guitars and drums, overheads replace hymnals, and pastors not wearing a tie. It must be the end times. This is heresy. Heads must roll. So there's the fight response. And the flight. I never did like your preaching. Your services are too long for me. The music is much too loud. So I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm joining another church. Again, to simply leave the table is the expression. It is highly encouraged and not always easy, but ultimately I think better in the long run to stay at the table, the discussion table, the conversation table, and to be in relationship with our fellow Unitarian Universalists to get back into right relationship. Or, again, the anxiety may lead us to a point of paralysis and just to freeze, not knowing what to do. Wonderful Far Side sketch here. He's trying to shoot me, all right. Do I know this guy? I've got to think. And I wanted to throw this one in here if you're a fan of the Naked Gun movies. Faced with anxiety or conflict, perhaps one would be inclined to simply avoid it or ignore it or suppress it. Here, Frank Drebin is standing in front of it was the exploding fireworks factory, exhorting everyone, move along, nothing to see here, nothing to see. So that might be an option that some people take, to simply ignore that we're feeling anxious, that we are in conflict with others, just to tell ourselves there's, nothing wrong here, our congregation is fine, very harmonious, very peaceful, but it's often denial, even in the most highly functioning congregations. Again, as people are gathered and as we struggle to fulfill our missions, there's bound to be disagreements and differences of interpretation. So I just want you to consider, recognize for yourself, do you have a tendency to react in a certain way when feeling anxious, when sensing one is in conflict? And it could be based on your upbringing, thinking for myself, and growing up, always hearing that message, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So just sort of a culture of niceness where just keep it to yourself, don't say anything, it wouldn't be nice, it wouldn't be polite. And I think the challenge is we can still be kind and engage healthy discussions, process our disagreements in a constructive way, and we can do it in a kind fashion. Being nice can imply, just not saying anything at all, lest it seem to be impolite. Yeah, I would agree that confronting others is an art and not something that we do easily. And again, a bit later, are there opportunities where we can sort of practice conflict engagement on a smaller level with people perhaps we're more confident with in sort of a practice setting to prepare us for when it may escalate or it may be more real. So to kind of move into how, as leaders, to model the healthy behavior, the healthy presence, the healthy activity, is the concept of differentiation, that a leader should endeavor to self-differentiate as opposed to be undifferentiating. And here it's defined as defining self to others while staying in touch with members of the group, even if they remain reactive. So it's a balance. It's not going to the extreme of total separation and distancing, nor is it the other extreme of just total entwining, intertwining, and wrapping around other people or getting caught up in their anxiety and feelings. So I want to emphasize to keep coming back to self. the concepts presented here, the idea of self-differentiation, and working on that self-differentiation is really the main point I want people to take away. While it may be helpful, or you may be able to recognize in others how their behavior is undifferentiated, or how they're being more reactive, I wouldn't want a little knowledge to be dangerous in the sense of, now I feel like I can sort of analyze and dissect all the people's behavior around me. When really what we want to be focusing on is, what is my behavior? How am I reacting? How am I responding? Which is where I have a lot more control over, and in that way I can model a more healthy and positive way of being in the right relationship. So I'll start with the undifferentiated characteristics and then move into the differentiated. So the term reactive, I've mentioned before, it's just a very inflexible position where a person just is unwilling to see the other side of the situation, the intolerance of ambiguity. It's very either this or that, as opposed to a more both-and approach to a situation, to a problem. And again, with this presentation being recorded and the PowerPoint presentation itself, which I'll include in that send-out, these indicators, something to keep in mind. Again, if you recognize it, the behavior is starting to creep up in your own behavior, to try to shift out of it, and then where you see it in others, at least to be aware of it in the back of your mind as you consider how to approach a person, how to engage in conversation and resolution. Okay, now triangulation, the simplest way I can put it is, if I have a problem with another person, person A, but I don't want to take it up with them, I'm going to go talk to person B and kind of vent and gripe and just unload it on them. And then I feel better because of it sort of giving me some temporary relief of the frustration of the anxiety I was feeling. But it hasn't really solved anything because I haven't directly engaged with the person I had the concern with. I kind of see it as like triangulation is sort of the basis of just about all reality television. To confess a guilty pleasure, my wife and I will often get our Real Housewives of New Jersey fix from time to time. And so any of those reality shows, it's kind of the same basis of, again, two people who are in conflict, but it is an open conflict. And, one or the other is going to go to everyone else other than the person they actually have the problem with and talk about it and, exacerbate it. And it certainly makes for entertaining television, and it would probably be, a very short series and boring television if people just went directly to the person they had an issue with right away and processed it. So it's something to recognize, if you find yourself falling into a triangulation where you're unloading that baggage on someone else, or, again, as leaders often find themselves, someone's coming to you and, I'm having a problem with this person, somehow can you make it better? Can you fix it? And how to respond to that, to just break down that triangle.
Hey, Chris, can I just jump in for a sec?
Yep.
Ryan just shared that lots of this stuff reminds him of a free book that he got a few months ago called Perspectives on Congregational Leadership by Israel Galindo. And Lorraine asked, don't people triangulate because it's difficult to meet the person you have an issue with?
Yes. It can be difficult to have that direct conversation face-to-face or over the phone, probably not via email, and I'll say a little bit later about electronic communications and covenant. And to recognize if someone's trying to put you in that triangulating position, or to be that third-party problem solver, one thing to encourage a person to do is, well, have you spoken to the person you have a concern with? When would you like to do that? It is, I would say it's okay if that person wanted someone to accompany them to that conversation, where that third-party presence can be somewhat supportive. It gets a slippery slope if a person keeps coming to you with those concerns, but never gets around to taking it on directly. And the challenge as leaders, there could be an initial, okay, I hear you're having a problem with this person. I can help you process that a little bit in sort of a practice way, but this conversation needs to end with a plan for you to then go speak to that person directly. But a person with those concerns, perhaps they'd say, well, it's not that bad. It's not that big of a deal that so and so keeps doing this. And if it's not that big of a deal, then why are you coming to me to complain or to gripe, to vent? So it's tempting as well to be the one who's sort of getting triangulated, because it feels like you're helping or offering that listening ear, and it's like I'm helping this person and they need me. That sort of need to be needed, but it sets up the potential for more conflict down the road, or that things will continue to persist and only get worse. Okay, thank you for making a note of that book to add to our take-home reading list. So on the more healthy side of things, understanding how to be a differentiated leader, to be self-managing, responsive, to be open, resilient, and have a breadth of understanding, allowing time for things to process, and even to add just to be patient, to stay at the table. There's a few more differentiated characteristics. Taking responsibility for self, be relaxed. Creating the space, as leaders to make space to have more difficult conversations, again, recognizing they can be uncomfortable, but that they can happen within a safe space. So that, relates to establishing the covenant of right relationship, and that's really when we need it the most, is when we get into uncomfortable situations, is to at least feel safe when we're trying to process them. So, again, just to take away the characteristics of undifferentiated versus differentiated, and to work as best as we can to stay on the differentiated side of the spectrum, and to at least recognize when we're starting to become undifferentiated, probably as a result of some of those anxiety triggers that are setting us off. And just to make a note, as leaders, to make a distinction between what your reaction to something may be, and then how you choose to respond to it. certainly the reactions may be beyond our control. Again, part of that instinctive, simply brain functioning. But then to take the time to process and to choose to respond, again, on the more differentiated side of things, versus just simply whatever that initial reaction is, to go from there. That may be the initial urge and desire to shoot off an email response. As soon as I get the initial email, let me slow down, take a breath, and decide what my response is going to be, not just going with my reaction. Take a minute before adding fuel to the fire versus helping to diffuse the situation. Being a differentiated leader, again, it emphasizes just consider how am I being and how am I doing, and not to just simply over-rely on certain techniques, information. It's just that practice of being that differentiated presence that can make a difference. Not everyone may like it. The undifferentiated people and behavior may react even more to it because you're not getting drawn into the drama and the controversy. But to focus on just what your presence is, what your functioning is, than any one sort of silver bullet technique that's going to solve the problem, because it rarely does. Again, focusing on self and focusing on the stewardship of the self. Okay, so again, I wanted to get into, well, again, some of the, quote, tools or, I guess, techniques and structures that would help in our ability to be in covenant and then engage conflict within that covenant of right relationship. So recognizing what our anxiety triggers are, what conflict is, what the levels are. Now, conflict will inevitably happen, as mentioned earlier. How can we successfully engage with that? Now, again, the title of the webinar itself, drawing from that preamble of the Statement of Principles and Purposes, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote. And then it outlines the 7 principles that we are oh so familiar with. And so that concept of covenant, certainly kept coming up for me as to how important it is to have covenants, to be in those covenants of right relationship, and to keep practicing them. And Unitarian Universalism, going into its history, its theological foundations, and the expression I hear spouted very often is Unitarian Universalism is a covenantal faith as opposed to a creedal faith. So I think it's a concept that many people are familiar with, children, youth, and adults. However, it does take practice to keep it relevant and keep it as part of how we are together. I'm guessing people can think of examples. The religious education classes, each of them probably have their class covenants. Adult classes, small group ministries. There are different examples of those agreements we make on how to speak to one another, how to treat one another, and so that the classes can be successful, that we can be heard, we can be listened to, we can be safe. I'll invite people, again, to add to the chat box, again, why is it that we choose to be in covenants? Why do we choose to make those covenants? How does it create the safe space? If you have any examples of why covenants are so prevalent in your congregation. So, as I mentioned, to create a safe space, that as part of the religious journey, we may engage in things that are going to make us uncomfortable, that will challenge our preconceived notions, So we need to at least have a safe space to do that. So whether your congregation already has a covenant or needs to create one, it's a process worth doing and redoing from time to time to make sure it's still relevant. It can be a covenant that encompasses the entire congregation, staff, lay leaders, members. It can be, again, group by group, committee by committee, to its own specific purposes or whatever is appropriate to its to the board, to the committee on ministry. It's just you can't emphasize it enough, and it's important that the covenants that are created don't become just shelved and stuffed away in file cabinets and folders. So, as leaders, when you have the opportunity to have a discussion of why we should be in covenant with one another, take that up from time to time. It could be an annual, process of covenant renewal at the start of the congregational year. Again, reviewing what do we need to address, what are the behaviors we want to model. Now, I talk more about the covenants of right relationship, but I will lift up the kind of converse of the what are sometimes called disruptive behavior policies. And I think the covenants of right relationship emphasize here is the behavior we want to see, we want to model. The disruptive behavior policies stress these are the things we don't want to see. These are the things that are going to create an unsafe physical, mental, emotional, spiritual environment. That the disruptive behavior policy, again, it's not as positive in its language, but they are somewhat complementary to one another. What we do want to see, what we don't want to see. It's important that both are crafted, preferably in a time when there is not active and high-level conflict happening. The challenge is when things are going very well, there isn't often that feeling that we need to have that because we just all get along so well already. And then something happens, and then it's like, oh, now I wish we had a covenant to come back to, or it would be helpful to say, oh, we clearly stated that this behavior is unsafe, and that's why we're asking you to come back into covenant to not breach the disruptive behavior policy. Just an example, earlier this evening, as I participated in a small group ministry group, which has a covenant, and it's not a thorough review at every meeting, but just giving a gentle reminder of how we agree to share the time, how we listen deeply, share deeply, to always keep it present in your activities. Some ways to practice this example in the board setting: reading the covenant regularly, reminding each other, and this can be more challenging, where you might feel uncomfortable making that gentle correction. Think about how I can do this in a kind way. That it's being done with the best of intentions. That this is a covenant, and we're all holding each other accountable, holding ourselves accountable. And even if it just starts in a one-on-one setting among leaders, what kind of covenant do we want to be in? The Metro New York District just had what's called our colleague conversation, which is offered not quite every year, but as new staff teams are entered into with new ministers, new religious educators, it's an opportunity for those staff members to meet together in this facilitated conversation and start to establish the framework of what their staff covenant will be. And having gone to that just recently, as the minister and I were having that conversation, we recognized this isn't relevant just for the minister and the village educator, it applies to the larger staff body of administrator, music professionals, and again, it isn't just for the paid professionals. Just checking some of the chat here.
Yeah, Chris, Lorraine made the point that that people think that because there's conflict, we're not living our principles, and so they leave. The conflict is inevitable. It's in every congregation. If it wasn't, I would be out of a job. I'm just kidding. But conflict is inevitable. We get in each other's way. We bang into each other. We're human beings. What should be inevitable is that people are unwilling to resolve those issues, and that's why congregational covenants are so important.
Yep, and absolutely that it's any human organization, be it the most progressive liberal to fundamentally conservative, people are people, and can behave in healthier or unhealthier ways. So there's nothing inherent about Unitarian Universalism or Unitarian Universalists that make us immune to conflict. It is part of human nature. So it's not easy, but it's the challenge of rising, of overcoming it on the foundation of our principles is what we're working towards, and it takes work to stay at the table and stay in a relationship. But it's the benefits, it's the fruits of being in that relationship that are so powerful by being in community. So other, the practice, ongoing practice of living in covenant, deeper listening. Listening to understand does not require agreement. I believe we heard that sentiment at a recent workshop. Can we reach a point where we may not agree with one another, but we still trust each other? And that is even more important. We can agree to disagree, but trust is maintained. Trust in the process. Trust in the bigger purpose we're serving. So again, more examples of the active listening. I've heard it expressed, listening is not simply waiting for the opportunity to pounce into a conversation. And that definitely takes practice, because I know as I start to listen to someone, it doesn't take long before my mind is calculating, I'm agreeing, I'm disagreeing, I'm going to counter with this point. So to kind of hold on, silence those inner those kind of inner voices for a little bit, so I can really hear what the person is saying. So, or here's one way we could deal with conflict. Reverend Nordstrom finally found an effective way to resolve church conflicts. I don't know. It could be a fundraiser of sorts. I don't know. I wanted to just briefly say a bit about a committee on ministry. Many congregations have one. Some may not. But as far as the leadership bodies of a congregation that may find itself engaging conflict, the committee on ministry often is one of them. I just wanted to emphasize that while it is something that they will engage, I say conflict management, not resolution, because again, the committee on ministry can help facilitate those parties, party A and B, having the conversation, having the dialogue. it's not the job of the committee of ministry to solve it for them. First and foremost, the committee is assessing how effectively the ministries of the congregation are fulfilling the mission. So that can lead. I mean, there could be issues of conflict there. If the mission isn't being fulfilled, or again, the differences of opinion on how to best fulfill it, how the resources are allocated. But there's no. I mean, whether it's a committee, a body of people, or just an individual leader, people will look for that sort of opportunity to triangulate. So as an individual leader wants to be mindful to not be triangulated, so too would a committee of ministry or any body, a board as such, to resist getting into a triangulation situation. So again, wherever you sit in the congregation as a lay leader, as a professional, we can see where member to member, staff to staff, and member to staff conflict can arise. So I just kind of rattle off a few kind of simple examples of where we might feel raised anxiety or a potential for conflict. Oh, that member always goes on and on during joys and sorrows. So there's such a talky McTalkerson during our small group sessions. I don't know why we keep doing that project, but so-and-so, they're just so tied to it that we got to keep doing it. It's okay. As I've become, to say, my theological evolution is good, but how dare someone else, evolve even more or become even more liberal in their theological persuasion. So conflict around, what the dominant theological culture of the congregation is. The expectations that members have of staff people can be both implicit and explicit, and often it's the expectations that aren't stated out loud in writing, or that there are many and conflicting expectations of what staff members are supposed to be doing, what lay leaders are supposed to be doing, and that's leading to conflict. And among staff themselves, feeling like I'm getting micromanaged, my supervisor isn't paying enough attention or paying too much attention, why don't they just let me do what I've done for 10 years? They just got here. So who knows what those anxiety triggers would be. But I'm sure we could each think of a few for ourselves as we've experienced them directly or indirectly. So the possibility where conflict can be exacerbated and where maintaining our covenant and right relationship may get a little bit harder. I'm going to say a little bit about the communication methods. So whether we're in person or on the phone or in the electronic world, we are still in covenant, and we need to keep practicing that. So to be mindful that there are limits to what email and social media communications can afford us, and there's a point where it's time to pick up the phone, have a face-to-face meeting. There's a great resource on UUA.org that goes over the email and listserv guidelines, and it's just a lot easier from behind a computer screen, typing an email for some of our better manners and good habits to just kind of fall to the wayside. That we may be less likely to practice and exhibit if we're sitting face-to-face or talking on the phone. So that UUA guideline could be a good place to start to kind of look at a congregation's own kind of internal communication agreements, sort of an addendum to the covenant of right relationship in the electronic zone. I see the comment of feeling appalled at how rude UUs can be on listservs. So that, we may all have one of those emails sitting in one of our subfolders, or maybe we've been the writer of such or the receiver of such. So, to say a little bit about expectations, implicit or explicit. If you're a Saturday Night Live fan, you may recognize this classic Chris Farley sketch where it was the hidden coffee, decaf coffee, hidden camera commercial, where Chris Farley is informed that he's not drinking regular coffee, he's actually drinking decaf coffee, to which his anxiety level rises quite quickly to the point of perhaps level 5 and beyond, conflict with the wait staff, throwing pies, overturning tables. So, simply put, he had a certain expectation, and that was not met, and he became very upset. So, Unitarian Universalists, may have different expectations about different things, and when they're not met, anxiety will rise, conflicts may emerge. So the one I wanted to start with, and that's the concept of the mission covenant. Again, only briefly, there are separate webinars on demand and perhaps in the future that get into the full articulation of a mission covenant statement. But just to simply say, if people have different understandings of what the mission of a congregation is, what its purpose is, what its reason for being is, that will likely lead to disagreements and conflict. In the sense of, I may prefer my particular ministry area over others, and I think my ministry is what the overall purpose should be. I want, religious education is the be-all and end-all. And someone else says, no, it's got to be social justice. So if everybody isn't, on the same page, then those conflicts will arise. That's how resources are allocated. So it's whatever it is for your congregation, that it's clear and upfront and it's compelling that, whatever our passionate ministry area is, we understand that it's committed to a bigger mission, that's greater than, any one part. So if that's not clear, this is where those early entry, the initial process of someone becoming a member is informed as to, we clearly state what our mission is as a congregation, and in choosing to become a member, we are choosing to commit to that mission. But if it's kind of wishy-washy, if it's not all that relevant, then it's kind of up for grabs, and it's, whoever, whatever dominant personality, gives direction to the ministry areas that get attention. Again, very briefly, there's a lot more information about the different sizes of churches. So as leaders, to be aware of where your congregation is and to understand that people will come with different expectations of the kind of church they want to be a part of. They may not use these terms. I want to be my family's looking for a church and we want to be part of a family congregation. We want to be part of a pastoral congregation. But there may be other subtle things they'll say or do. We want to be part of a church where everybody knows the minister, where I can call the minister at any time of day and they'll respond to me. That's indicative of a pastoral type church. So when you have members who want different items from these categories, again, there's where your expectations vary, and staff will feel flummoxed. Lay leaders, will have different expectations as if they were in a smaller church or a larger church. Okay, the expectations around roles, time and time again, the emphasis that the volunteer positions have clarity about what it entails, when it starts and ends. Many a volunteer kind of get burnt out or feel like snake bitten when they get the kind of bait and switch on a volunteer position that they thought was going to be one thing, but turns out to be so much more. And now I won't do that again, and I'm probably going to be less inclined to commit to any volunteer roles. So just having those, again, upfront and clear about, this is what a position does and also perhaps what it doesn't do, and understanding where the sum total of paid and unpaid, ordained and lay-led positions all fit together within committees, within ministry teams. So there's understanding of how communication flows, if there's a, quote, chain of command that's appropriate and clear, and that nothing is left undone, or it's just very clearly understood that we don't have the resources to do everything we want to do, but for the resources we have, this is what we can accomplish, and here's how it's divided among the paid staff and the volunteers. Now, I wanted to share, a few weeks ago, Reverend Laura Kim Joyner offered a workshop on nonviolent communication, and some of the concepts there really struck me as being relevant to how we understand anxiety and conflict and then engaging it. And if you happen to be in the Metro New York District and heading to our Defying Gravity Leadership Day, she'll be doing a workshop also related to that. But I think there are many resources around nonviolent communication to draw from. But just to recognize, hearing people's concerns or kind of getting underneath what conflict is presenting on the surface, there are probably one or more of these wants, needs, and values that a person is seeking to have met around survival, protection, interdependence, empathy, regeneration, transcendence, well-being, honesty, autonomy, and meaning. So, again, to recognize for yourself as a leader, how those wants, needs, and values are being met through your service, through your participation, and recognizing if something isn't being met. So what's that about? How can I address that? And again, whether a person is conscious of it, if they're kind of getting in your face or getting all worked up over something, maybe it's one or more of these underlying values that they're not feeling are being addressed through whatever aspect of congregational life they're participating in. And there's sort of specific ways to more in a more constructive manner process concerns. I note them here: observation, feeling, needs, and requests. So just, for example, it's sort of the active listening and the feedback process to say, observing that when I hear you say you're frustrated that we're doing joys and sorrows differently, acknowledging the feelings, this is what I am feeling. Am I hearing that you're feeling frustrated, upset, hurt? And then making requests. Would you be willing to Would you be willing to tell me what you understand me to be saying? Would you be willing to tell me how you feel when I tell you this? So, again, this was just an introduction to nonviolent communication. So I'll leave it to Reverend Laura Kim Joyner to lead the full-fledged series on that. But there are, I think, many books and resources that can be constructive in how to have these more positive conversations and dialogue. Again, I know that's a good amount of information, a lot of overarching concepts. So just to emphasize, taking those concepts to apply them, again, to your own areas of leadership, focusing on your own self-differentiation, looking for, where can you as a leader practice that covenant of right relationship, even starting just one-to-one with a fellow lay leader, fellow staff member, and to slowly kind of expand the circle, expand the covenant, whether the covenants are clearly stated within the congregation or they need to be renewed and refreshed. They are living documents that need to keep getting practiced to be relevant and to be fruitful. But I'll close us with these words by Hosea Ballou. If we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace.